All right, everyone. Welcome in to the CardsHQ podcast. I am Jeff Greer, joined via FaceTime by Steve Jones. Steve, can you hear me okay amid the electric theme music that we play here in the background?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. I'm sure that the theme music is quite electric.
It's banging.
Yeah.
Well, this week's episode is going to focus entirely on U of L baseball. The Cards got their marching orders, so to speak, in the NCAA tournament. There is a pretty good, it's the NCAA baseball tournament, so anything can happen, but there is a chance, if everybody wins out, that Louisville could meet Kentucky in the Super Regional, which, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be at Louisville. So that there's potential for a high-stakes best-of-3 series at Patterson Stadium here coming up. Let's start there. Steve, you were at the selection ceremony yesterday and the party that they had for it. What did you kind of gather from the vibe of the team during the selection process and kind of going into this week?
Yeah, I would say that it was very, the mood, the reaction was very, well, Devin Hairston himself said it was mellow. It was understated. That there was no big jubilation, celebration when things showed up on TV. I think everyone, it's not a big deal anymore for Louisville to make the tournament. Like it probably would have been 15 years ago, or maybe what it was like for Kentucky, for instance. Although Kentucky's made the tournament, but for them to have such a high seed and get to host and all that stuff is new. For Louisville, it's not new. They knew on Sunday that they would host. There was a little bit of lingering drama as to whether they would get a national seed. I mean, it seemed like to me, would have been a shocking turn of events had they not. But they did. They went from being ranked number 2 in the country to losing their last 3 regular season games. Then they lost, then they obviously beat Notre Dame very easily in the ACC tournament, and then lost again to Florida State, 3 straight losses to them. So they lost 4 out of 5 going into the selection show and didn't get out of pool play of the ACC. So it led you to believe somewhat that there could have been some chance that they could have fallen out of the top 8. As it is, they turned out number 7. I would say that number 7 was more surprised. I would have thought they'd be more like 5 or 6 than 7 or 8. So I definitely would have been really, really surprised if they had been not a national seed at all. But they were not super celebratory, jubilant at all. I mean, it was just sort of they were just kind of nonplussed, if that's the word. I don't know, just sort of it wasn't a big deal because it seemed like it was all a little bit known in advance. With baseball, it's not like basketball where you just know all these personnel when you see the matchups and you automatically can tell different things about it. I mean, they drew Radford in the first round. Radford won the Big South tournament, but has a losing record on the season. I think Louisville has played them in the NCAA tournament sometime recently, but they are, as you would think, use a basketball comparison of 15 or I guess like a 15 seed in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma is got a decent record, but I think has over 20 losses. Is the 2 seed, and Xavier is the 3 seed, and they've been matched up. They play Louisville every single year. Louisville beat them like 13-4 or something like that early in the year. They always play them in a midweek game every year. It's about what you would expect. I mean, I think Louisville would come in as a very heavy favorite if you base it on the results of the year as a whole. Louisville probably was as good as everybody outside of Oregon State as far as their consistency throughout the year, but they have struggled in the last few weeks. And I guess that was a bit of a concern. Most of the media questions that they got were based on that. People like, what's wrong with you guys? Why haven't you won? Are you worried about it? All this stuff. And I think they mostly are just chalking it up to the fact that Florida State was super hot. They played them 3 times. Florida State went from almost being like a bubble team for the NCAAs to now they're hosting a regional. So they won the ACC tournament, and they also lost to Indiana, which is a 2 seed in that Kentucky region that you mentioned, and so Indiana's always got a good team and coached by the former U of L assistant, so I don't think that they think it's a big deal. I think it's just they kind of chalked it up as that it was inevitable that at some point during the year you may have some stumbling blocks, and for them it happened to be the last 2 weeks of the season before the NCAAs. Now, what's interesting to remember is that the pool play in the ACC tournament was such that you only get 2 games, right? So you have to basically go undefeated to get to the semifinals, and they went 1-1. It's not terrible to go 1-1 out of 2 games, and they have not really done very well in the ACC tournament the last 2 previous years, and they haven't won a conference tournament. They've been in all these various conferences that they move around to. They hadn't won a conference tournament since 2009.
Yeah.
But over that time, they've been, hugely successful in the NCAA tournament. They've won the last 4 regionals at home. They've been in the College World Series in 13 and 14. So, they were basically one inning away from making it the last 2 years. So I think that really, the fans, as much as they're paying attention to it, probably had added focus and attention, maybe unrealistically or unreasonably so, on the ACC tournament because it was here in town.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, if it had been in Durham and they lost 2 games, I don't think anybody would make a big deal out of it, because it's the same as it was last year. And they came in as number 2 seed and they blew the teams away in the regional. So, if they lose on Friday to Radford in a 1-4 game, then I think that would be a huge cause for concern. But at this point, they got a whole week off. They got a couple injuries of guys that are going to be back. McKay, his swing was hit 2 home runs in the ACC tournament.
Drew Ellis homer too.
He was okay in this game against Notre Dame, right? I mean, you were at that game.
Yeah, he was okay. I mean, he was okay. He threw a lot of pitches, but then he kind of settled down. But yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing.
He did have a high pitch count. Yeah.
He was past 100, I think, in like the 4th or 5th inning. I think in the 5th inning. But the one thing that's interesting to me, Steve, is aside from, you mentioned Xavier, Oklahoma has had a long history of being a good program, but not more recently. But I think the other regional that bleeds into the super regional could produce any of the 3 teams, not discounting Ohio, but Kentucky, Indiana, and NC State are all pretty good. I mean, NC State historically has been very good. Indiana, is back in the tournament for the first time in a couple years, but they've always, they beat Louisville earlier this month, and Kentucky split with them. So, like you mentioned,
NC State has beat them too. All 3 of those teams have one victory against Kentucky.
Yeah, and it was really interesting talking to them leading up to the ACC tournament and just basically saying, like, look, why do you think that you guys are, 2-4 and now 3-5 in ACC tournament play? And their answer was always, because baseball is weird and sometimes, like you said, you can be down to your final out basically and somehow pull a rabbit out of a hat and win a game as the teams the last 2 super regionals in Louisville have done. So yeah, I mean, I just look at this group that's going to be playing at Kentucky and see 3 really potentially troublesome opponents for Louisville. It's just been sort of weird the past couple weeks how they have just really struggled with a couple different things. I mean, one, their starters have been good but not as great as they were. Cade McClure and Brendan McKay they've got the numbers that just scream like this is a super dynamic duo, but they've been good, but not to that level since. And, giving up 3 runs or 4 runs in 6 innings or whatever, and that just keeps things close. But like McClure against Florida State, the previous weekend, not the ACC tournament, but the previous weekend, all 3 of the runs he gave up were unearned. So, I mean, I guess it's just kind of things seem to be tipping the scales in the opposite direction for Louisville a lot lately. And you wonder if baseball will continue to do that to them, just kind of the luck and fortune of baseball, or if it'll swing back to them because, as you know as well as anyone, they were getting all sorts of good bounces and rolling along and obviously playing their best ball for long stretches of this season, winning a ton of games in a row multiple times. It just seems like they've had some bad luck here lately that has turned the tide against them.
They swept at Clemson, just 2 weeks ago, and they had won 15 in a row or something like that. I'm not sure that, and then they beat Notre Dame. Honestly, they lost 3 games to Florida State. That's really what it boils down to. I think one of those Clemson games they had a bunch of errors, and they have been shakier on defense. McKay's velocity has been down probably as the season has, gone on. I wonder how that'll affect his draft prospects a little bit because he was considered a 91 to 93 kind of guy, and I think he's been more in the 89 to 91 kind of range here recently, which would almost give him almost a below average major league fastball, where he's always had an average or slightly above average major league fastball.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a little bit of interesting, especially since his hitting has remained excellent, and he continues to hit home runs if you try and think about which place they would draft him. But that's a little bit of a concern. As you say, he's throwing a lot of pitches. It's a long season. He's playing both ways. He's still amazing. And I think, as you say, though, if you look at all those teams, you'd be like, yeah, they could be, any of those teams could potentially beat Louisville. Still, obviously, you're going to say, if you're one of those teams, you're like, oh, man, we have to face Louisville. And I think that they still are a really, really good team. Drew Ellis has been off the charts this year and continued to be in the ACC tournament. And you're still going to have to beat McKay and McClure, one of them, and and another guy. I guess Nick Bennett has been the guy mostly on Sundays, although they haven't needed him the last few weeks. So you're going to have to beat 2 or 3 of those guys to get through a super. So I would still think that things are really good for Louisville, and Radford is the kind of team, although you never know what's going to happen in a given day, that they've been able to pretty much beat handily throughout the year.
Well, yeah, and they never
these midweek games. Radford's that kind of team.
Well, and they've never had problems with teams like that in the opener. It seems like they've never. I don't
have problems with any teams in these regionals.
Yeah, they coast right through it.
They're 22-8 in the NCAA tournament at Patterson. 4 of those losses have been in the last 2 years in the Super. So I guess before that, I don't even remember, but it was something crazy. They had been, probably like 20, 18-4 or something for 3 or 4 years. So like they are they are kind of built for the postseason. I thought last year's team was the team that was absolutely built for the postseason because they had 3 starters, and they could shift them around and put McKay on a day they wanted to against a certain team, and start Funkhauser on a certain day, and then they had Zach Birdie at the end. If you have a lead, you're going to win. But he blew it the last 2 years, and that was very unexpected. But they should be, based on the results they've had throughout the whole year, I think they should be considered a very strong contender again to make it back to Omaha.
Yeah. Well, it's just like we were talking, I guess, at I think we were at the Derby. We were talking about Louisville baseball and obviously the difference between some of the teams that have made the College World Series and the teams that haven't, and it is, and I'll admit in retrospect, it's unfair to entirely rate a team based on whether or not they get to the College World Series because of what we've seen now the past couple years. With one swing of the bat changes the entire trajectory of a season and changes all of what we think about of a team. But it also, I do think that I will continue to make the argument that it does say something about the teams that are able to withstand those moments and get through. But I'm just so intrigued to see if they can. It's like the Mariners a few years ago. Well, not a few years ago now. It was like 15 years ago. But you remember that the record-setting season that they had in like 2001, I think it was, where they won like 115 games or something like that. You remember that team?
Right, and they lost in the divisional series.
Yeah, they didn't even get out. Yeah, and it just goes to show you how, more than probably anything else, any other sport, how errors, and obviously like with Louisville, the famous fair or foul home run call a couple years ago, it was before they really did any sort of like review or anything like that. That was a huge argument. Actually, I can't even remember. I think they actually might have reviewed that, now that I think about it. But just little things like that you can't accommodate or think about when you're looking at a team roster and saying, yeah, these guys should be the favorite. It's not quite like it's not quite like football or basketball, where because they're playing multiple games, talent can kind of win out in most scenarios. Basketball, obviously, the one and done stuff in the tournament makes it tough, but like in a best of three, in theory, Villanova's not going to lose to an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. If they play best of three, they might get upset once, but they'll probably win in 3 games. But in baseball, it's just so wonky that weird things can happen, that you lose one game and then all of a sudden, you muff one ground ball in game 3 and the whole trajectory of everything changes. So it's been really weird that Louisville has been bitten by this odd bit of luck, both in the ACC tournaments the past few years and the super regionals, after being so dominant in the regular season the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, with college baseball, the issue, especially in the regionals, is just the pitching depth. I mean, that is, I don't know really very much about Radford. I plan to look them up the next day or so, but I mean, do they have a guy that can go 8 innings and shut Louisville down? Do they have one pitcher like that? Or will they just immediately start using 5 different guys on Friday, to desperately try and get through? I'm not sure. But that Louisville will be throwing Brendan McKay, who might be the best college pitcher in the country. And then the next day they'll have another, all ACC sort of level player in McClure. And they're just not, and Nick Bennett has been actually probably statistically as good as McClure. So between those 3 guys, they have the kind of pitching depth. Now, in previous years, there was like 0 drop-off almost between their Friday, Saturday, and Sunday guys, which was incredible. And other teams just couldn't keep pace with that.
Yeah.
But that's the difference in a sort of a double elimination or a longer series in college baseball, is because, it can be a vast talent difference, especially for like a Radford Louisville kind of matchup. That Radford's guys probably or may not be good enough to get 9 runs on Brendan McKay, and they may not have a pitcher that's good enough to go 8 innings and shut down Louisville. So that it is a little bit of a which is what you see on Tuesday and Wednesday games throughout the whole year.
Yeah.
So that's really key, obviously, for them to win that first game, which you would expect that they would. But it is baseball, like you said.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, speaking of talent, and I know we were talking about covering this before we came on and started recording, but so you had a very good kind of rundown of what major league prospects exist for Brendan McKay, and I thought it was really interesting how some teams and some of the analysts that cover this stuff are interested in the possibility or intrigued by the possibility of McKay being a two-way player. What did you get? I guess what was your primary takeaway from that? I mean, you talked to so many different people about all of this. I mean, what was your primary takeaway from talking to them about Brendan McKay?
Yeah, so a couple of the good insights that I got were from Jim Callis from MLB.com and formerly Baseball America, and John Manuel, who's the editor of Baseball America. I mean, it's crazy, those guys just level of like, oh yeah, you remember this guy from the 2002 draft who came out of Boston College. It's just, they're just encyclopedias about this kind of stuff. So the thing about McKay that those guys pointed out is on a few things. For one, I mean, I don't know that I think Louisville fans obviously are aware that he's a great player. He's been on the team for 3 years. He's projected as an All-American and a high pick and stuff. But I don't know that it is extremely rare that you would have a guy who is almost as high, is truly. I mean, he is as highly regarded as a pitcher and as a hitter equally. Now, there's a lot of guys who have been great college players over the years. Think about, like locally, the A.J. Reed guy from UK a few years ago, who are good two-way players. I mean, excellent two-way players. But it's very clear which one they're better at, or which one they have a better draft prospect. And with Brendan, it's really not. I mean, he is truly like a top 5 pick for either discipline, and he could just. I mean, he is. There's really. I mean, you could take it, and that is very rare. Jim Callis said he's the best two-way player as far as where there's no clear-cut opinion on which position he should play in the majors or in the pros. He's that good, the first guy since Dave Winfield, going back 43 years or something. I think 1973 draft. Who, I would think most people didn't even know, who think of Dave Winfield as the Hall of Fame slugger and stuff. But he was like the dude as a pitcher at the University of Minnesota, who struck out like 15 guys in like the 1972 College World Series or 7, just like crazy. And Brendan McKay's like the best guy since then. John Olerud would maybe be another example of a guy. So that's one thing. He is truly elite in both areas, and there's and people aren't sure which he should be. So that leads to the possibility that he could theoretically, at least definitely at the start of his pro career, do some of both. Because the way that sort of rookie ball works, as my understanding is that college pitchers they'll pretty much shut him down. Like I think like a guy like Drew Harrington last year or Kyle Funkhauser last year or whatever, they pitched a long season. They get drafted, their college season ends in June or whatever, and then they only maybe pitched 10 or 15 more innings the rest of the year. I think Drew Harrington pitched like 9 innings last year. Didn't even make any starts, so just do a couple 1 or 2 inning appearances. So if they like him as a pitcher, he's probably not going to pitch a whole lot anyway. He may do 3 or 4 2-inning starts, or he may pitch an inning here or inning there. So if he's doing that every 5th or 6th day, then they could definitely also DH him or let him play first base or whatever. So I think that this season. This first rookie pro season, there's a good chance that he'll do both. Obviously, if he gets drafted by a National League team, he'll get to hit when he makes it to the majors. And I think most people think that he would, he would be the first pitcher that would go into the majors. He's good enough to have that kind of quick ascent. But the deal with him as a pitcher is that he does have some limitations. You know, as we said, he throws about 93 when he's throwing well, and recently he hasn't been throwing that hard. His changeup is not considered plus. His curveball is considered potentially plus, you know, like major league top level for a left-hander especially. And now he started this cutter, which is very new. He's only been doing it for the last 3 or 4 months, which is also unusual as it pertains to him. This cut fastball he's been throwing, and he's done it actually pretty effectively. But I guess maybe, like, this was according to John Manuel from Baseball America, is like that's so sort of strange. So that sort of even brings into a question of, is that awesome that he has this extra versatile pitch that he's just added, or is that show that maybe he's not plus and advanced and a whole lot of other things? And none of that's to say he's not a great prospect as a pitcher. It's just to say, okay, well, maybe he's better even as a hitter than he is a pitcher if he's got some limitations as a pitcher, because he has really turned it on this year as a hitter. And he's had, I don't know, what's he up to, 17 home runs or something like that now, and he's hit around 400. And, you know, but the limitation with that is, you know, do you take a first baseman, a college first baseman, that high in the draft? It's just the history of the draft is such that it doesn't happen that often. The times that guys, the really, really good college position players who get taken high in the draft tend to play other positions, you know, than first base. They're more athletic guys who, you know, guys like Chris Bryant or
Corey Ray last year.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, guys that have a defensive, a running, a throwing kind of element to them as well. Now, the issue with McKay is he's got this pitching talent, obviously, too. So, I mean, that's something to say. But, you know, John Manuel compared him and said he thought he could be, you know, there had been, it's crazy to think about all the great first basemen in the major league. So, you know, all these guys, sluggers and things like that. Adrian Gonzalez in 2000, I think, was the last first baseman that went number 1 in the draft. So, I mean, he would be bucking, and he was a high schooler. So, I don't know that there's been a college first baseman that's ever gone number 1 in the draft. And for the most part, those guys, you know, I think guys that have been really, really high college first baseman, you know, there's not been a whole lot, and some of those guys haven't been superstars to warrant maybe getting picked that high. So that's the question with him there. So maybe you would want him as a pitcher because he's a good left-handed pitcher who's almost definitely going to end up being a major league third or fourth or maybe number 2 starter. So it's hard to, you know, would you rather have a 300 batting first baseman who can hit 20 homers, or would you rather have a number 3 starter, left-handed starter who maybe doesn't have overpowering stuff?
Right.
Now, the other little thing about him is that if you get him like the Reds, for instance, which pick number 2, they could draft him as a pitcher, and then he could hit for them every 5th day and pinch hit, you know, every other day, you know, because National League teams use 2 or 3 pinch hitters every game. So that would be awesome. You know, I mean, I think it would be really fun as a fan to see a guy who truly contributes in both aspects of the game. You know, Louisville's coaches all think it would just be, you know, their hitting coach is just like, if you draft him as a pitcher, and he thought he probably stands out better as a pitcher because he has this sort of instinct as a way to just command the inside and adjust pitch by pitch to what the hitter's doing, and just thinks he's a genius at that kind of stuff. But he's also this really just sweet swinging batter who doesn't need much work. I mean, my understanding is that he kind of takes about half as many swings as a guy like Drew Ellis does in practice because he's basically working out with the pitchers, you know. So in that way, why wouldn't you DH him? You know, okay, even if on the major league level, instead of having some light hitting outfielder as your DH or your number 9 hitter or whatever, why wouldn't you just put Brendan McKay in there on a day he doesn't pitch. But I guess we'll see whether all that takes place or not. But it's definitely interesting, and there's not really been a guy like him. The other thing that as we're moving into these final games of the season and of his career is that he is very possibly like the most decorated college baseball player of not just his generation, but of many generations. You know, John Manuel from Baseball America said he would be the most accomplished college baseball player in the history of Baseball America, which goes back to like 1980.
Wow.
I mean, he's going to be a first-team All-American for 3 straight years. There's only been 2 others of those ever. One, I forget who they were. Greg Swindell, who I guess played the majors. He went to Texas, and Robin Ventura, who had a long major league career as well. Those are the only 2 guys that have ever been 3-time first-team All-Americas for Baseball America. He's going to be the 3-time winner of the John Allroot Award. He's probably going to win the Golden Spikes. He's been a Friday and Saturday starter in the ACC for 3 years and been cleanup on the best, the ACC champion. He is an incredible, incredible player, and I don't know that people quite realize that he is that good, that he is that historically good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would you say he's the best player ever to play college baseball? Probably not, because he's, year in, year out, there may be a better guy, but for the level of consistency and production and accolades and the awards and things like that he's going to get, there really have not been many, if any, better than him in the last 25 or 30 years.
Yeah. Well, and it's been such an interesting since I started here in Louisville in the fall of 2013. It's really it's every single year Louisville has churned out very, very, very talented kids. I mean, Kyle Funkhauser, Corey Ray. I mean, the list is pretty impressive. Will Smith, and the fact that Nick Birdie and Zach Birdie, but the fact that McKay has surpassed that already really impressive group, even just for a college program, says a lot about him. I mean, those guys were all Funkhauser had like every record by the time he left in terms of strikeouts and innings and all of that stuff. I mean, he claimed a bunch of records. So the fact that Louisville has this kid alone is just so impressive for their baseball program, and it'd be interesting to see if they get the kid from where's Adele from? Is he Ballard?
Yeah.
Is he? You think he'll stick?
Well, I sort of get the sense that he, this is the Jordan Adele, who's an outfielder and a pitcher for Ballard, and is far and away the best high school player in the state, if not one of the 2 or 3 best in the country. Some places project him as a top 10 pick right now, like sort of Baseball America and Jim Callis at MLB Pipeline that we were saying. But the way that the draft works, even if a team really likes him at like number 10, what if another player that they like better falls to them and they don't take him? So then maybe Adele slips to like 25 or something like that. Just how it works. Then would he go? To U of L, because that's a big difference. So I would think that I don't know a whole lot about the situation. Jason Frakes, I think, may be writing about him sometime soon, but I think that that it's possible. Yeah, I think it is possible that he does come to Louisville, even though he is a unanimously projected as a first-round pick.
Well, they have.
And he's a beast.
He's supposed to be a beast.
He's like watching a major league player play high school baseball. Is like it's how it's been told to me to go out to watch one of his games.
Well, they certainly.
With McKay, though, I did want to say, I forgot to mention in my long spiel about McKay, that Dan McDonald said, told me last week when I interviewed him, that he considers he considers Chris Dominguez the greatest hitter at U of L history, and Justin Marks the greatest pitcher in U of L history.
Okay.
And that he just sits there shaking his head, thinking that now Brendan McKay is better than both in both aspects.
That's incredible.
He is going to go down, in Dan McDonald's mind, as both the best pitcher and the best hitter ever to play at Louisville.
Well, we'll see if it's certainly going to be tough with the groups of teams with the group of teams that is in that other region, and with Oklahoma, I think is a pretty good team coming into Louisville to get through. But we'll see if McKay can lead them to the College World Series. Steve, we'll end it there. I will be gone next week. We're hoping that the NCAA does not hand out its infractions ruling while I'm on vacation, but knowing my luck, it will definitely happen, and it'll happen at like the worst possible time. But if that does not come, we'll try to do some sort of podcast as regularly scheduled, but otherwise keep an eye out for that. But Steve, we'll be when are you going to be at the ballpark? Are you Saturday and Sunday?
Yeah, I think I'm covering Saturday and Sunday along with Danielle Lerner, who will be out there throughout the weekend. And what, you're going to cover Friday's game, I think? With her?
I'll be out there Thursday for the press conference, and then I'll be at Friday's game. So we'll have all sorts of good stuff on CourierJournal.com, and as we always remind you guys, find us on Facebook, CardsHQ. You can download our app, and you can also listen to our podcast via SoundCloud or iTunes. So make sure you subscribe there and make Steve and I look good. Steve and me look good to all of our friends and family. But Steve, I hope you had a nice Memorial Day weekend, and appreciate you filling us in a little bit on the Brendan McKay draft situation, and make sure everybody pays attention to CourierJournal.com this week.